Jack Edwards earned a Purple Heart and the respect of every driver in the yard. But when Richard Morant, the new supervisor, demanded he remove his medals from his cab, everything changed. What made him hate those medals so much? And what secret was he carrying that no one dared to ask about? The yard at National Freight buzzed with the usual morning routine: diesel engines rumbling, voices echoing over dispatch radios, the clatter of boots on concrete. Amid the noise and movement, Jack Edwards moved with quiet purpose. He wasn't the loudest, the fastest, or the flashiest, but he was the one drivers watched when things got tough on the road. They called him Cap, short for Captain, though no one ever asked if he'd really held the rank. Jack's rig, an older rig with a worn leather seat and the faint scent of engine oil, was more than a truck. It was a second skin. Inside the cab, right above the dashboard, 3 items sat where he could see them every day: a Purple Heart, a faded patch with the word honor, and a small photograph of a young soldier, himself, standing beside 2 men whose faces were lost to time but never forgotten. None of it was show. Jack never talked about the war, never mentioned where he served or what he saw. But every driver in the yard knew not to touch those medals, not to ask too many questions. That silence carried weight, and weight in trucking earns respect. Then came Richard Morant, fresh from corporate. Black slacks, tucked shirt, silver tie. He was a very well-dressed guy for this world, with a neat shirt and no calluses on his hands. From day one, he made his mission clear. This wasn't a truck stop family anymore. This was a business, and businesses ran on rules. No more coffee breaks outside the truck yard. No more smoking near the fueling lanes. And absolutely no personal items in company vehicles. "We're not here to decorate," he'd announced on his second morning, standing on a crate like a general barking orders. Most drivers rolled their eyes, but obeyed. They knew the cycle. Corporate sends someone new, he makes a splash, then either adapts or burns out. But when Richard stopped by Jack's rig that Thursday morning, things turned. Jack was checking the tire pressure, crouched beside the cab when he heard the voice above him. "Edwards, is that a Purple Heart on your dash?" Jack stood slowly. His height gave him a natural authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm gaze that didn't challenge, but didn't yield either. "Yes." Richard stepped up onto the side rail and peeked in. His lips twisted slightly. "Take it down. All of it. Medals, patches, whatever else you've got hanging there. This isn't a museum." Jack didn't blink. "It's my cab. It's a company vehicle. Company policy says no personal displays. That includes military memorabilia. We're drivers, not whatever you used to be." The words hung in the air like engine smoke. A few nearby drivers had paused what they were doing. One of them, Charlie Riggs, leaned back against his truck with folded arms, watching silently. Jack turned, opened the door of his rig, and with slow, deliberate hands, removed the medals and photo. He didn't say a word, didn't argue, just tucked them into a small pouch behind his seat and locked the compartment. "Thank you for cooperating," Richard muttered, before turning away. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Later that day, in the break room, the story had already spread. He told Jack to take down his Purple Heart. "No way. Dead serious." Said it looked unprofessional. Charlie sat at a table in the back, not speaking. He wasn't a gossip, but something about Richard had felt off. Not just strict, bitter, and not just about rules, about Jack. There'd been a flicker in Richard's face, a strain in his voice when he said the words, "whatever you used to be." That night, Charlie stayed a little later than usual. He'd been with the company 6 years. He knew the look of someone who carried a story they refused to tell. The next morning, the yard was quieter than usual. Jack arrived early, as always, and climbed into his cab without a word. Charlie watched him from across the lot. Richard came out of the dispatch office 10 minutes later, clipboard in hand. He didn't look at Jack, just moved from rig to rig, inspecting, pointing, correcting. That's when Charlie walked over to Jack's truck. "Morning, Cap," he said casually. Jack nodded, eyes scanning his logbook. "Heard what happened," Charlie added after a pause. Jack kept writing. "Wasn't right," Charlie said. Jack glanced up. His eyes were calm, but something behind them flickered. Not anger, not hurt, acceptance. The kind that's learned the hard way. "I don't need symbols to remember who I am," Jack said softly. "But that man, he's fighting something. And it's not me." Charlie tilted his head. "You think he's got a reason?" Jack didn't answer, but Charlie's gaze drifted across the yard, landing on Richard again. He couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't just enforcing policy. He was pushing back against something he couldn't name, and Jack's medals had been the match that lit it. By the end of the day, Jack's cab was bare. But the silence in the yard had taken on a different tone, one of watchfulness. And Charlie, without quite knowing why, found himself checking Richard's expression every time he passed. Not for rules, but for cracks. By the following morning, the yard at National Freight had changed. The trucks still rumbled. Diesel still hung in the air like fog, but the mood was different. There was a tension that wrapped itself around the loading docks and break room, a silence that settled over conversations like static. Everyone had heard. Jack Edwards had been ordered to remove the metals from his cab, and he had done it, without a word. Some drivers didn't comment at all. They stuck to their routines, filled out their logs, checked their loads. But others watched Richard Morant now with a new kind of wariness. The kind reserved for someone who'd crossed a line they didn't fully understand. "Wasn't right," muttered Dean, a driver in his 50s, wiping oil from his hands beside a fuel pump. "Man bled for this country. Got the scars to prove it." "Company policy," replied another, shrugging. "Boss makes the rules." "Policy's one thing," Dean said. "Disrespect's another." Charlie Riggs had heard all of it. Something about the whole thing kept gnawing at him. Not just what Richard had said, but how he said it, as if the medals were offensive, as if Jack's quiet pride was a threat. That night, after pulling into his apartment lot and killing the engine, Charlie sat for a moment in the quiet of his own truck cab. Then he pulled out his phone and scrolled until he found the number. George Avery. The name still carried weight in the yard. George had been the supervisor for nearly a decade before shifting to a back-office logistics role 2 states over. Everyone respected him because he listened. He remembered birthdays, asked about family. He let drivers personalize their trucks within reason, and even rode along when one of them hit a rough patch just to talk. Charlie thumbed out a message. "You might want to hear what they're doing to Jack's cab. New guys making calls that don't sit right. Thought you'd want to know." He hesitated, then added, "It's strange. Feels personal." He hit send and sat back. 5 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "George, be there by morning." Shortly after 9 a.m. the next day, a dented silver Ford F-150 pulled into the loading dock. George Avery stepped out, wearing jeans and an old canvas jacket with a faded company patch on the shoulder. His gray beard was a little longer, and the lines on his face a little deeper, but his walk still had the firm, unhurried confidence of someone who'd been on both sides of a breakdown. Charlie spotted him first. "He really came," he muttered to himself, watching from the shadow of a trailer. George didn't go to Jack. He went straight to the dispatch office without talking to the drivers. Inside, Richard looked up from his desk, slightly startled. "George Avery," George said, stepping in without invitation. "You got a minute?" Richard stood. "I didn't call for a review. This yard is under new management." George nodded. "I'm aware. Just wanted to talk." "Mind if it's outside?" Richard's jaw tensed. "This isn't a backlit chat over coffee. I have protocols to enforce." George gave a half smile. "Good. So do I. I'd like to talk about the removal of Jack Edwards's medals." Richard crossed his arms. He was in violation of company policy. No personal items in company vehicles. "I'm enforcing the rules equally." George tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Didn't seem to bother you when it was a team photo or a bobblehead on the dash. What is it about those medals that gets under your skin?" Richard's lips tightened. "We're not here to idolize soldiers. This isn't a charity for veterans." George's expression didn't change, but something in the air cooled. "No one's idolizing. Jack doesn't ask for praise. He just keeps driving." never missed a route, never filed a complaint. You think those medals are decoration. I think they're part of why this place runs as smoothly as it does. Richard stepped closer. And I think you're still living in the past, George. These drivers need discipline, not sentimentality. Outside, a few drivers had gathered subtly, pretending to adjust straps or check tires, but their eyes were on the two men standing in the open doorway. Charlie leaned on a pallet nearby, watching closely. George didn't raise his voice. There's a difference between discipline and disrespect. You don't have to like what Jack stands for, but you don't get to erase it. You think I care about some old war medal? Richard snapped. He puts it on display like a trophy, like it gives him some kind of authority. It's not a trophy, George said evenly. It's a piece of him, and maybe what's bothering you isn't what he's showing. Maybe it's what you're hiding. That stopped Richard. There was a flicker, just a flash of something behind the eyes. Not guilt, not fear, grief. Then Richard said, quieter than before, I'm not here to play favorites. No one's asking you to, George replied. But you're playing something else, and it's starting to show. He turned to go, but stopped in the doorway. You ever need to talk about what's really bothering you? I'll listen. Doesn't have to be now. Richard didn't reply. As George walked away, the drivers around the yard scattered, not wanting to be seen eavesdropping. But Charlie remained. He watched Richard closely, and for the first time he noticed something that hadn't been clear before. Richard wasn't just enforcing rules. He was fighting something that hurt, and something he wasn't ready to say out loud. George had stepped away from the dispatch office, but drivers still lingered around the lot, checking straps that didn't need checking, leaning on trailers, pretending to inspect tire pressure. Something had shifted. No one could name it, but everyone felt it. Richard stood by the doorway, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the yard without really seeing it. His face was hard, but not composed. His posture tight, but trembling just beneath the surface. Then a black SUV rolled through the gate. Sleek, quiet, company plate on the front bumper. Charlie, leaning on a trailer with his arms crossed, narrowed his eyes. That's Leonard's car. Within seconds, the murmurs rippled through the drivers like wind over a wheat field. The CO was here. Leonard Bender stepped out in rolled-up shirt sleeves and dark slacks. No tie. He was in his early 60s, trim but not frail, with a calm confidence in his eyes. Not military, but he carried authority like someone who'd earned it. He didn't head for the office. He walked straight to Richard. The yard went still. "Morning, Richard," Leonard said calmly. Richard straightened. "Mr. Bender, I wasn't informed. You weren't supposed to be. I got a call from George." Leonard looked around, at Jack, at Charlie, at the other drivers. No one pretended to be working now. "I've been hearing things," Leonard said, "about new rules, about removing medals. It's company policy," Richard said quickly. "Standardization of the fleet. No personal items inside vehicles. No exceptions." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is about? Policy?" "Yes," Richard replied. "I don't see why Edwards should be treated differently." Leonard turned to George, then to Jack, and back to Richard. And then he sighed. "You know, when we hired you, we reviewed your records, your work history, and something else." Richard's eyes flicked sideways, his throat tightening. "I don't see how that's relevant." "You had a brother," Leonard said gently. "Private First Class Daniel Morant. Killed in Kandahar. I read the incident report." The words landed like a dropped wrench. Richard didn't answer. Leonard's voice dropped. Not stern, compassionate. "Honest. You never told anyone here about him. Never mentioned it. But I think it's time we stop pretending this has nothing to do with him." Richard's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the drivers, now openly listening. "This isn't about—" "Yes, it is," Leonard cut in, softly but firmly. "It always has been." And then something broke. Richard's face twitched. Not in anger, but in pain. His lips parted, and his voice came out low, ragged. "He hangs those medals like they mean something good," Richard said. "Like it's noble. like it's proud. But I saw what one of those really means. The silence deepened. My brother wore one just like it, Richard continued, louder now. Bronze star. They pinned it to his chest in a box. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Just a folded flag and a note from someone who never knew him. He looked around, not in defiance this time, but with eyes rimmed red and full of hurt. I would have gone in his place, he said bitterly. God knows I asked to, but they wouldn't take me. Asthma. Minor but disqualifying. So he went, and he never came back. His voice cracked, and I've had to wake up every day since then wondering why. Why he went and I stayed. And why no one gives a damn now. Charlie swallowed hard, his arms slowly uncrossing. Across the yard, the air felt thicker. I look at Edwards and I see a man who got to come home, Richard said. And I wanted to tear that down, because I couldn't deal with the part of me that was glad he came home, while mine didn't. He covered his face with one hand. No one moved. Then Leonard stepped closer. That pain doesn't go away on its own, Richard, he said. It festers, and you turned it into bitterness. You turned it into control. But it's not helping you. And it sure as hell isn't helping anyone else. Richard looked down. No arguments left. Leonard turned to the drivers. No one's taking away anyone's right to honor their past, he said. Jack's medals go back up, and that's final. There was a quiet nod from Jack. No pride, just quiet dignity. And Richard, Leonard continued, turning back to him, you need time. You need help. Grief isn't weakness, but ignoring it is. You're taking a leave. Effective immediately. You'll talk to someone. Work through this. And when you're ready, we'll talk about you coming back. Richard looked stunned. But more than that, relieved. He nodded, slowly. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. To all of you. George stepped forward. I'll hold things down here. Leonard gave him a grateful nod. And then Charlie stepped away from the trailer, walking up slowly. He didn't say anything. He just offered Richard a firm handshake. Richard took it. And for the first time since arriving at National Freight, his posture softened. There was a quiet understanding, and healing finally beginning. The next few weeks were quieter. More was being understood. Richard Morant was officially on leave, just as Leonard had announced. No drama, just a different kind of silence in the National Freight yard. Less tense, more thoughtful. Drivers started talking more among themselves. Less about routes, loads, or dispatchers, and more about people. Charlie found himself thinking about it often. Since the moment Richard's pain had been exposed, something inside him had shifted. He kept remembering his own older brother, who never served in the military, but had fought his own invisible battles before vanishing from the family years ago. Charlie felt, maybe for the first time, that this job wasn't just about deadlines and diesel. It was about the stories each man carried with him. One afternoon, as the sun began dipping behind the trailers and Jack Edwards sat beneath the shade of his cab, flipping through a worn notebook, Charlie walked up. Hey Jack, Charlie said. Mind if I show you something? Jack looked up over the rim of his glasses and nodded. Charlie opened the glove box of his own truck and pulled out a laminated photo. A woman holding a cake, laughing with her head tilted back. My mom, he said softly. She used to make me pancakes every time I came home off the road. She passed last year. But every time I feel like quitting, I think of that laugh. Jack took the photo gently, studied it in silence. I've been thinking, Charlie continued, what if we made something? Just a small wooden shelf inside the break room, where any driver could leave a photo, a note, a keepsake, something that reminds them why they keep going. Jack looked at the ground, thoughtful. Then he replied, voice deep and sure, include Seth Morant. Charlie blinked. Richard's brother? Jack nodded. He deserves to be remembered, too, even if Richard never spoke of him before. We know now. And if anyone needs to see that pain can turn into honor, it's Richard. Charlie pitched the idea to Leonard the next day. The CO was surprised and deeply moved. He not only approved it, but personally ordered the maintenance team to craft a solid wood cabinet with glass doors and a small plaque above it, what we carry inside, honoring our roads and our roots. Jack returned with an envelope. Inside was an old military photo of Seth Morant, pulled from a veteran's archive. He added a handwritten quote beneath it. Not all soldiers wear medals, and not all medals are worn on the chest. Some are carried in silence, and some in the hearts of those left behind. When Richard returned some weeks later, he looked thinner, more rested, and somehow softer around the eyes. He didn't make a speech. No grand entrance. He just walked into the yard quietly. No one rushed him. No one avoided him. Something drew him to the break room. Maybe instinct, maybe the hush that fell as he passed. When he stepped inside, his eyes locked onto the new cabinet. Photos, letters, a faded trucker cap, a child's drawing that said, "Welcome home, Dad." And in the center, the name Seth Morant, 1985 to 2010. Beneath the photo, Jack's quote. Richard froze. He stared. Breathing slowed. Shoulders dropped. Jack appeared quietly in the doorway, hands behind his back. "You did this?" Richard asked, his voice cracked but clear. Jack shook his head. "Charlie built it. I just added what belonged there." Richard stepped forward, pressed his fingers lightly to the glass, then bowed his head. "Thank you," he said, low, raw, real. The first time anyone had ever heard his voice that unguarded. The other drivers began filtering in. Some offered handshakes. Others simply nodded. No judgment, just quiet respect. Charlie pulled out a chair. "We saved you a spot at the table," he said with a crooked grin. Richard gave a half-smile. "I guess I'm not completely useless here?" From across the room, Leonard responded, "Not as a supervisor. Not yet. But as a man, you've already come a long way." And so, a new rhythm began. There were no big speeches in the days that followed, but plenty of small changes. The yard grew quieter in tone, warmer in spirit. Veterans began to talk about their stories more freely. New hires were trained not only in routes but in how to treat people. Richard was seeing a company therapist. He still didn't say much, but when he did, the words landed softer. Jack once asked him, "How's it going, really?" Richard paused, looked him in the eye, and replied, "I'm not carrying it alone anymore." Jack nodded. That's what matters. The display case in the break room kept growing. It wasn't just about memories anymore. It was about why we keep driving, why we keep showing up. Because in the end, it was never just about trucks or rules or uniformity. It was about honor, about grief made visible, and about the quiet strength of one man who chose not to shout, and another who finally let himself be heard. This story reminds us that sometimes anger is just grief with nowhere to go. Richard was a man breaking under the weight of what he never said out loud. What would you have done in his place? Let us know in the comments, and if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe for more from Embrace the Journey. See you in the next video.